Welcome again to our freight conversation, where we continue to talk about the world of freight by continuing the previous conversation and adding it to the next one. I'm your host, Bill Priestley, and joining us today is Andrew Lockwood, Senior Director of Managed Logistics at Southern Global Logistics. Andrew, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Glad. Thank you, Bill, for having me on. Always glad to talk freight and all things logistics.
Glad to have you add your voice to the conversation as well. So we pick up where we left off last week, and of course we had Ryan Schreiber of Metaphor talk about autonomous vehicles, and here's what he had to say.
I'm going to go back to talking about autonomous vehicles because I don't think that we talk about it enough. I think that often the conversation around autonomous vehicles just centers on sort of extremes of the conversation. Oh, they're going to take everybody's jobs, like it's right around the corner, or it's never going to happen. And so I think like there's a middle, right? And I find myself in the middle, which is I'm bullish on it. I think it's really important, and I think we need to figure it out. And also, there are very real challenges to where it is today. So I'd love the next person to start by talking about what starting from kind of like a growth mindset perspective of, okay, everything's a problem to solve. Like, what are some of the major problems that we need to solve for right now that can help make meaningful progress on autonomy, not from a technological perspective, because the technology is pretty good, not from a technology perspective, but from a change management perspective. What do we need to do to change people's behavior? How do we change people's behavior? How do we change people's thought process around autonomous vehicles to drive a better, safer environment on the road for the professional drivers, and to protect the professional drivers from four-wheelers who are trying to kill themselves and kill other people. So I'd love to hear somebody talk a little bit more about that, because I think that conversation could use some more attention.
So, Andrew, what we have here is an interesting problem, kind of like a storm coming from the distance. It's like, well, some people say, well, it's never going to make it here. We don't have to worry about it. Some people say we need to batten down the hatches because this is going to drastically change the entire freight, certainly the trucking universe. And then you have others that say, well, we actually built the storm and we think it's going to be okay. So what's your take on what he said?
Yeah, I really like this question because the way he kind of framed it is he said, we usually talk about the extremes of autonomous vehicles. It's either about the technology, which we all know is developing and has been developing for the past couple of years. But I kind of likened it to a very pragmatic, approach of, what are the things that's going to, help move this along. I was thinking about this kind of randomly last night of, you think about our cars and just how they've changed. I mean, back in, when we were growing up, right, they had the tape players. No one knows what a tape is anymore, but the tape player, and you had the cigarette lighter, and now everything's evolved to where it's got Apple CarPlay. And so that those changes weren't overnight. Like there were small little evolutions in each model or year iteration of each vehicle, and that kind of got us to where we are now. But I think the same is going to be true in our industry. There's those that are going to say, oh yeah, it's next year. Like the technology is there, and for sure the technology is always kind of out front by a couple years. But I think about what's it going to take to really get it going, and it's a very similar conversation with Tesla and some of the other other things that are going on in the car industry, where you've got the technology with the autonomy is there. It's just working through the change management. And the biggest thing is safety on the highways, right? I mean, anytime you have the one or two cases where somebody gets hit and killed and you've got lawyers involved, it just gets messy. And so, one thing, and again, I love the state of Florida because we have some good roads down here where there are great test cases. But I'm a big advocate for, I talked at length with Kevin Hill about this 2 years ago, turnpike tandems. It's kind of a little known fact, but between Orlando and Miami, you can run 2 48-foot trailers. And so there's these weird loopholes sometimes, and it's state by state, but that's essentially a 2-for-1 with a truck. The problem is, and really the constraints are, you can't go more than, I think it was 5 or 10 miles off the highway. So you are very constrained to just the Florida Turnpike. But man, that would be an amazing test ground to get this launched. And I think that's all you need is you need one good use case to say, you know what, look at all the benefits. You need a large shipper that's got volume going, maybe in both directions, where they could really use something like that every day. the great part about autonomous trucks, right? They're not limited to 11 driving hours and 14 on the clock. No, they can go continuously. So you're essentially doubling your capacity anytime you do a one-for-one swap, driver behind a vehicle versus autonomous truck. So I think that's where it's going to start. It has to start at the state level. Larger shipper who wants their name in the news and to maybe get some credibility behind this. But the Turnpike's it's mostly 2 lanes. Like there's not a whole bunch between Orlando and Miami. It's really a great test ground. We see the reports in the news, Bill, of this company, this startup's doing this and that. But I think to get it off the ground, it's got to be done within one state first. You've got to build some trust within the public realm, and then that's where, when you start getting states to work together at a federal level, that's where it'll happen.
Let me just ask this from this perspective, because I hear a lot of people. We would talk to Omar Singh of Surge Transportation in the very first of these talks, and one of the things we brought up was autonomy. And so he said something interesting in the fact that, if he ever saw, the first time, if he ever sees one of these trucks that has all these cameras across the front of it, he's going to stay away from it. He's just kind of like, it's a little bit unfamiliar kind of thing.
Yeah.
How much of this do you think is about losing control because there's nobody at the wheel?
I think there's the perception of losing control, right? And so and that's on a couple fronts. With drivers and with jobs, our politicians are going to there's going to be a lot of maybe hidden elements that are against autonomy. I mean, let's think about it for a second. And no one's really mentioned this, but I don't think railroads are going to be super happy that autonomous trucks are going on the road. I mean, think about it. It cuts into the exact freight they're looking to haul. So if you can double your capacity on the road, that is absolutely going to be something the railroads are going to fight. And in fact, we've seen this already, played out with the Turnpike Tandems argument. That the railroads kind of fight that on the side with LTL carriers. So, I think there's the politics of change management, and again, you're going to have, an extreme case, a crash and a death. You've got to build public trust, I think, with however this starts.
Yeah.
Well,
I was going to say, just dovetailing off of that, I think a lot of people see autonomous trucks as, okay, yes, it's progress, or it's moving forward, which not so much the machines are taking over, but it's like, okay, it's an automated task.
Yeah.
That's becoming more and more possible. And but also there's this tremendous fear, I think, as well, that it's a when, not an if, when an autonomous truck is involved in a fatal accident.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That's the big overwhelming dark cloud that I think that people would kind of look at this and go, this is a really bad idea if machines mindlessly kill people.
It is, and I mean,
which is not the connotation, but you get the gist.
Well, exactly, and I hate to say it, but like, there's going to be collateral damage along the way. I mean, there always is when there's progress. No one wants to hear that. Like, that's not a great soundbite, but that will happen down the road. We've already seen this with Tesla. I'm just using Tesla because everyone thinks of Tesla when you think about autonomous vehicles and getting, but and those are cases where the driver's still engaged. Now we're talking about no driver at all. Somebody in Nevada, it's kind of like a drone pilot. And then the question could be, okay, was that same person who is behind a computer screen states away, are they controlling 4 or 5 trucks at the same time, right? Because it's not like they've got to be actively involved. They need to be able to read sensors and react rather quickly, but can you manage multiple trucks? So these are, it's a public trust thing. I'm a big cyclist myself, and so I think to get this up and running, that's one worry I have, as a cyclist, is what happens when there's a car or a truck behind me on the road that doesn't see me, or one of the cameras is faulty. Am I taking my life in my own hands? But pragmatically, this is going to happen. The technology's there. How far it's away? I think it's, I don't know, a handful of years, but no one knows. You have to have a good use case and build up trust and a safety record to really expand it. But it's going to be absolutely on, hub to hub on a large highway. We're not talking about surface roads and kind of local. I think that's years away. But for sure, this could replace long-haul trucking as we know it within 5-10 years.
Let me jump kind of off this particular issue and into another tangent that's has certainly been brought up and discussed in other areas, and that is that when the technology becomes full circle, if you will, and it's there and it is proven and it works. there are a lot of people that think that we're looking at standardization, that we're going to see the same system on every truck, and that the government is going to have to jump in and say, all right, here's the system that works. This is what we're going to do, and it's going to become an FMCSA issue. What do you think about that possibility if things, as they get to that point where we get,
Yeah.
hey, it works, we've proven it, are we going to go to regulation?
I think you have to. The question is, can the FMCSA get in front of it enough? It's good that they're asking questions from the public and asking.
And they're doing that now, yeah.
Exactly. They're doing
Yeah.
it now, which I think is a great move. I think about something as simple as, does every truck or trailer need a QR code? Let's just, kind of work through an example. Let's say we see an autonomous truck. We're driving next to it on the highway. It's in the far right lane, but we see one of the tires is about to go out. Is there a way, how right now, we could drive alongside and wave our hands and beep and honk and get the driver's attention? What happens when no one's behind the wheel, when it's somebody in, a bunker in Nevada that's driving this thing? Is there a QR code you scan? So there's some standardization that I think has got to be put in place. Same thing for roadside inspections, right? How do we make sure that the cargo in that trailer, if they're doing just a drop and hook at a hub, how do we make sure that that the seal's still intact and that everything's in working order? So we have to go down a road anyways for standardization across the industry. That's going to force the issue, just with those two types of things alone, of the communication and feedback loop, and then the ability to kind of intercept it from a state agency angle if they need to.
What do you say to people who see automation as, and you've already brought this up, but we haven't really talked about it, who see automation, autonomy as replacing jobs?
I mean, I think it's a really short-sighted view.
It
does. I mean, it's going to replace the jobs as we know. It's going to create other ones, though. I think just think about some of the impacts, right? We mentioned this earlier in the conversation, is the capacity has the ability to almost double. Now, let's almost put it in two different buckets here. There's going to be local trucking jobs. Those still remain for a long time, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The autonomy to operate at a local level is so much more complex than what it would be to drive hub to hub on a highway. So much fewer variables there. So let's kind of divide the entire industry into two buckets, local and then over the road. So if we say over the road has the ability to kind of double in capacity, I mean, think about spot rates and like what we saw in the last couple of months and year, just with, 10, 15% more capacity added. When you add 25%, like that's going to really impact the entire industry in such a big way. And so I think then it becomes, how can someone operate from from a profitable standpoint and do it, in leaner fashion. So it's going to create opportunities, a lot more in the technology, hemisphere there. But it's going to create jobs and needs there. Supply chains, we know this about supply chains. They're chameleons. Like the needs are going to shift all over the place. And so if you have an adaptable workforce, you're good. We see what we see in the trucking industry, though, is there's a lot of folks that got into the industry in the 70s and 80s when there was regulation. Industry's been deregulated, and that's where you see the average age, mid, upper 50s in the industry. And so some drivers may say, hey, look, I'm done with this. I'm going to retire early. Others may be in their 30s and 40s and may need to be adaptable and kind of use that on-the-road knowledge in a different context in 10 years. So
yeah. Let me. I'll ask this one more question on this subject, and I promise I'll get off of it because I know that this can bother some people, and this question is going to unfortunately bother a lot of people. But we had you've got ATA President Speer said at his meeting late last year, we have 78,000 drivers spots that we have a 70,000 driver shortage in the country. What does automation do to that? I mean, and there's you have to bring up that point.
You do, yeah. And, oh man, in this conversation will go down a couple paths because I would say there's no actual driver shortage, right? So I'm a big believer economics balances.
So you have to acknowledge the argument in the first place, but yes, but I mean, just given his argument, given the fact that there's 78,000 needed drivers, automation all of a sudden looks a whole lot different.
It does, and I think that's the reason I think the myth of the driver shortage has been propagated by a lot of people in our industry too, right? Is because we have a driver retention issue. And the reason we have a driver retention issue, in my mind, is two main reasons. One, driver parking, and then one, we are so inefficient when it comes to loading and unloading drivers. Like, there's an entire huge issue with taking advantage of the driver's full amount of driving time. And so we haven't really addressed that. Like, you look at the Biden administration's trucking action plan, or whatever they've called it. And so they do bring some good case studies into the fold that, you know, shows that we're sorely inefficient with drivers' time, based on, I think it was an MIT study. But now we're here at this, you know, juncture where we have some money as a federal government to spend, and we've got to figure out how to best allocate that. But back to your point, I mean, I think autonomy certainly solves a driver shortage issue, but you have to get it off the ground. Like, we need a test case like starting like ASAP. Hopefully in the state of Florida on the Turnpike to again kind of prove it out and say, hey, this is how we can create less chaos the next time there's a bullwhip effect in our economy. Our industry has the ability to absorb that bullwhip, you know, up and down a lot better. But it will create a lot of different things we haven't even thought about. Even think about the brokerage aspect here, Bill. What happens now when you have to broker a load, and it's not just one carrier, but you have to have one carrier take it to a hub, and then you're going to deal with an autonomous company, hub to hub, and then finally so dealing with one carrier is now three, and there's all kinds of different things to think through there.
Yeah, no, I mean, you could go right down that path if you want to, because this thing, some people say, well, it makes life easier, and other people say this makes life a heck of a lot more complicated.
It does, and I think, you know, going back to your comment about standardization, I mean, it does bring up some pretty critical issues that our industry's got to get our hands around and solve. Because just in that example I gave you, where instead of one carrier now dealing with three, think about the trailers too, right? We can do trailer interchange agreements sometimes to get, you know, things across border. That works really well when you're talking about over the border in Mexico. But now there's a whole lot of things that bring to the forefront the need for standardization, and to me that should be driven at the federal level. But you've got to do that in conjunction with kind of some groups, some consortiums at the private sector level to really make that pragmatic and to work.
All right, so there's a question that I love to ask. I don't get a chance to ask it very often, but I'm going to throw it out here at you because you can apply this to most anything, but especially to technology. If we're willing to take this step into automation, into autonomy, into autonomous trucks, what's next?
Ooh.
What's coming after that?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Because most people are thinking of autonomy.
Because it's a progression, right?
Right.
It's a progression. What's coming next right after that?
Gosh, Bill, I can tell you spent some time on that question. I think it's the integration of just, you know, tracking visibility, not from like a TMS standpoint, but how do you bring all these data points together, from, you know, autonomous driver to a cab in Los Angeles with one guy in it. How do you get full shipment visibility as to where your stuff's at? At the end of the day, people want peace of mind as to where their stuff's at. I started to see this a lot during COVID. And so there's a great website, Marine Traffic. You can go search the ship. You can do it by container number and show, okay, look, it's right here off the coast. If you want to go out there, go on your fishing boat and pick up your container type thing. But at the end of the day, you know, most shippers, most consumers just want peace of mind of knowing either my stuff's going to be here on time or it's going to be late. And if it's late, where is it and why? So I think it does kind of force us to technologically think of, again, like standardization. Is there a standard way to bring all this information together, one central portal or platform, to kind of solve that visibility problem?
All right, just got three more questions here for you, and then we'll wrap up this particular conversation. Let me take it to another thing. You already brought this up, which was retention, and the industry having a tough time retaining drivers. What does autonomy do for recruitment?
I think it makes it a lot easier.
Or again, oh really? Okay.
A lot easier. Yeah.
I'm looking. If I'm not a driver and I'm thinking about this as a possible career, and I'm seeing autonomy take over in some direction, you know, and if I'm a CDL away from a gig, who's to say how long I'm going to be able to keep that gig, even if you know, maybe I want to be a long haul trucker.
Yeah. Well, and in my opinion, I think it makes recruiting a lot easier, but it is also in kind of your perspective, right? And so if you view yourself as an adaptable and changeable person, I mean, like let's look at the pros as a driver in 10 years. most jobs are going to be local, so I'm going to be in my bed every night. So I get to interact with my family. The home life is there probably in a way that definitely is not there today. A lot of the issues that have popped up since deregulation is the bottom dropped out of the market from a rate standpoint. Anyone could go lease a truck. Anyone can be their own boss and owner operator, and because the stakes are low now to get in, everyone's got in, or the ability to get in is very easy. And so it's driven market pricing down to where it's super hard to make a buck. I mean, what was very much a solid middle class job has become like it's a really tough way to make a living. Like, I have a ton of respect for people that get into this industry and grind it out. I think it makes it easier because then the focus is on quality. It's not just like churning miles and getting paid per mile, 45 cents, 50 cents a mile. Now it's like, hey, did you get there on time? Or did you greet the warehouse in a way that represents the business well? Like, or if you're doing a final mile delivery for something that you got from the autonomous hub, it's all about the customer service element. And so I think it puts a much higher focus and value on the quality, not just getting the stuff there, but like doing it on time and in a way that is represents the business that you're shipping for. So in the businesses I've been in the past, the drivers really excel when they feel like they are the spokesman for the business, and that is simple as like a polo or a hat that has the logo up top, right? They feel ownership of that. They are representing the brand. When they feel like they're just a cog in the machine, and then their truck driver, 64125, who's making X amount per mile, they're probably there for 9 months and they're gone. So I think it actually makes it a lot easier.
That's a great point there as well. All right, two questions combined into one, and you can concentrate on autonomy, or you can jump out of it if you would like to. What is maybe one thing that you are very bullish about with this, and one thing that you're very bearish about as well?
Gosh,
because every issue seems to have at least two sides to it.
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to jump out of autonomy here. Like, I'm very bullish on. Gosh, that's a good one, Bill. Like the ability, for supply chains to add value and to become a much bigger part of the overall conversation in the economy. Like, I'm very bullish on that. And the reason is we've seen just the past 2 years, people that had no idea, what the going rates from China to West Coast are. Now they have a much better sense of like all the different stages of the road that a product gets to their doorstep, right? And so before it magically appeared because I ordered on Amazon. Now we actually know that it's produced in China, and then it gets on a container ship, and then there's warehouse shortages. And so very bullish on like the ability of that knowledge to maybe transform our idea of consumerism. Our economy survives in large part because we buy so much stuff. And so I think we all realize like, wow, this is what happens when the entire world economy shuts down. Really, it's highlighted our dependence on China. So my prediction is we're going to see, a lot of nearshoring. Not necessarily manufacturing jobs come back to the U.S. because our cost to manufacture is still way too high. But Mexico, Central America, Caribbean are going to become. I'm already starting to see it from some of our clients. They're shifting away from Asia because they don't want to put so many eggs in that basket for both geopolitical reasons and for supply chain reasons. So I'm very bullish on the ability and kind of the power of that information to affect our overall consumer economy in a very positive way. I'm bearish on inventories, and so what's weird about inventories? This whole like just in case inventory, like I don't understand that. Like it's like we've gone from one end of the spectrum completely to the other. And I'm not saying like just in case is the best. A lot of people have said, okay, lean methodology, like we're getting away from that. Just in case was wrong. I just think everyone kind of we acted upon signals that we thought were there at the beginning of COVID, and then again there was this huge bullwhip effect. But just in case is not pragmatic. It won't work. Like it's going to be detrimental to a lot of companies' bottom lines. Like just in case is a bloated form of corporate consumerism that's just, I don't know. I think it's going to get worse. So I'm bearish unfortunately, on our ability as an economy to kind of tackle that issue. Warehouses, when we think about capacity in different areas, truckload capacity is very different than like warehouse capacity. Warehouse capacity takes a lot longer to build. There's an increased cost of material there. Truckload capacity is a lot more agile and flexible. So I see us going down a road of building more and more and more warehouses. Where there's 3% vacancy right now. I don't know. I think we're going down some wrong roads. Just at a very high level, every company's got a different stance on that. But just in case, I think it's a flash in the pan. Like I don't think it's going to be here for a long time. That's where I'm bearish on that.
Let me just ask you one follow-up with that. Do you think that maybe just in case has application in certain areas where the needs are immediate? For instance, semiconductors. We had that massive shortage. All of a sudden, you have 3,500-pound paperweights in cars that can't work because they don't have the chips.
Yeah, I think there's certain areas of the economy certainly that it's highlighted very vulnerable pieces, and so when there's critical components like semiconductors, I think about some of our current customer base that is looking at break fix programs because they realize, gosh, 2019 we could get a hot dog roller for in 6 weeks lead time. Now it's 26 lead time. Like we can't handle that, and so I think certain specific areas of the economy like that has highlighted some vulnerabilities that you just need to kind of plan around. And just in case, on the spectrum of like just in time, just in case, like that may be shifting like to somewhere in the middle, right? Like you don't need 14 warehouses across the U.S., but maybe you don't need just one. Like so, it's somewhere in the middle. But for more commoditized things, like I don't see the economics lining up there, for that long term.
Yeah, that doesn't seem necessarily smart, certainly in certain industries. All right, so you have the ear of the entire freight audience. Let's say you have the podium. Where do you want to see the conversation go, Andrew Lockwood?
Yeah, so specifically, if I were the transportation secretary for one day, and whoever's coming next, what I would want them to answer is, look, let's say, Pete's out for the day, and you're the transportation secretary, and you want to drive forward kind of a very pragmatic plan for spending all this money, in the years forward. Like, how would you do it? And specifically, like, I would go to two areas that we've kind of highlighted during the conversation, like specifically truck parking and then the inefficiencies at the warehouse. And so if we know that that's plaguing the trucking industry right now, I think about, like, could we offer incentives to warehouses that turn drivers within 30 minutes instead of 3 hours? Like, is that worth incenting shippers or warehouses or 3PLs? Like, is the money best spent there so that the drivers are back on the road? Is the money best spent, building more truck parking lots, especially knowing that autonomous hubs are coming down the road? Can you kill two birds with one stone? What's the best way to spend all this money? Because I think we acknowledge the issues of the industry. To me, those are, again, the very top two. But I don't know. I'm interested in those thoughts of whomever's coming after me of like how would you best spend this pot of money?
You have given someone a lot to think about.
Exactly.
That's for sure. All right, Andrew Lockwood, thanks so much for joining us on our Freight Conversation.
Thank you, Bill.